The Nature of Art and Creativity, Part 2. Continuing where we left off in Part 1 of our series, let's now discuss the concept of art and reality. This is the work of New Yorker Akash Nihalani, who makes street art installations. Using tape, he creates these eye-catching optical illusions. You can see he is laying down on the floor, so the camera angle is shooting straight down on top of him in his taped work. These are terms that are used to describe an artwork's relationship to the physical world. First, we have on top representational art. That is art that recognizably represents or depicts a particular subject. Abstract art is an art that depicts natural objects in simplified or exaggerated ways which may not be recognizable. Non-representational art is art without reference to anything outside of itself. Sometimes it's also referred to as non-objective. First, let's take a look at some representational work. This is A Smoke Backstage by William Harnett. This, in fact, is life-size and very realistic. It's so realistic that it would be described as a trompe-l'oeil painting, which is a French term that means fool the eye. It's a two-dimensional representation that is so naturalistic that it looks actual or real or three-dimensional. Even though there are differences between these two works, they are both considered to be representational works, as they are clearly recognizable representations of a pipe. The work on the right says in French, "Ceci n'est pas une pipe." This is not a pipe, which of course begs the question, if this is not a pipe, then what is it? It's a painting. René Magritte, the Belgian surrealist, is playing a visual game with us. This fun trompe-l'oeil painting, playfully titled Escaping Criticism, is by the Spanish painter Pere Borrell del Caso in 1874. Capturing contemporary pop culture in a larger-than-life format, it's 4 feet by 5.5 feet, the modern Spanish painter Pedro Campos uses oil on canvas to create these Coke cans. This painting, because of its unrealistic size, isn't considered a trompe-l'oeil, fool-the-eye painting. Nonetheless, it is astonishingly realistic, as if it were a color photograph. In Denmark, a Copenhagen ad agency called Bates Y&R used trompe-l'oeil to create a striking advertising campaign in 2010 for the Copenhagen Zoo. We can see a giant boa constrictor appears to be crushing the bus. Very impressive fool-the-eye illusion. Their work was so popular that it was also used on and in subway cars. Wouldn't it be fun to unexpectedly see such lifelike images of monkeys, lions, snakes inside the subway cars? Abstract art. In art, abstract can mean two things: works that have no reference to natural objects, or works that depict natural objects in simplified, distorted, or in an exaggerated fashion. Here we can see the European artist Theo van Doesburg simplifying a cow in stages. The bottom right image is so divorced from the original drawing of a cow that if we were to see this work without knowing the previous works, we might see this as a non-representational painting, or work that has no reference to natural objects. In this work, The Gray Tree by Mondrian, we can see the artist reducing the visual essence of a tree. Mondrian creates a rhythmic series of arcs and draws attention to the negative spaces between the branches. He is abstracting the tree. Let's look at Sunday Afternoon by the painter Elaine de Kooning. When we encounter abstract works such as this, it's helpful to bring as much as we can to the table, to bring our imagination and to make an effort to try and see something inside the work. What do you see? Students have often mentioned that they see a bull, a large bat, or some other animal painted in powerful colors with a great sense of urgency in the brushstrokes. As a viewer, it's okay to see something different than the artist intended. Multiple interpretations often add to the possibilities and richness of a work. This actual painting was inspired after Elaine de Kooning visited Juarez, Mexico, with a friend and watched the bullfights. She was captivated by the movements and colors of her new surroundings. This abstracted portrait of a bull is rendered by sweeping, gestural brushstrokes and the warm tones of a desert landscape. Non-representational or non-objective art presents visual forms with no specific references to anything outside of themselves. So this is not like abstracting a tree or an animal, etc.
In this large, non-objective painting by Ellsworth Kelly, the traditional brush strokes that we normally associate with the art of painting are gone. In fact, there's no evidence of the hand anywhere. Kelly is using razor-sharp edges and clearly delineated areas of color to distill painting to its essential two-dimensional elements. Just as we can respond to the pure sound forms of music, so we can respond to the pure visual forms of non-representational or non-objective art. Pablo Picasso, when once asked to explain one of his works, quipped that you don't need the singing birds explained to you to enjoy the birds singing. Attempting to explain painting, according to Picasso, was something kind of like this. This is definitely an idea worth pondering. Much of the world's art was not meant to be representational at all. For example, in traditional Islamic societies, prohibitions on the reproduction of people and figures in art led artists to create unique, elegant, and highly detailed geometric patterns as seen on these walls. The Italian Renaissance artist and mathematician Piero della Francesca believed the highest beauty resides in forms that have the clarity and purity of geometric forms. Looking versus seeing. Looking is a physical act. Seeing is a mental process of perception. Seeing involves recognizing or connecting the information the eyes take in with your previous knowledge and experiences to create meaning. Looking is more habitual, mechanical activity, but in seeing, we look with our memories, imaginations, and feelings attached. This is much more than looking and requires much more effort. Seeing is what we must do when we appreciate art. Look at these evocative photographs from the American photographer Edward Weston. What do these look like to you? Body parts, wrestlers, tongues, etc.? When I was creating this presentation, the computer's algorithm suggested the alt text for this first image, saying it was a close-up of a hand when these are just peppers. Using a camera time exposure of over 2 hours, Weston has managed to capture the glowing skin and anthropomorphic or human characteristics of these peppers. He's encouraging us to see a common object more deeply. Personally speaking, after becoming aware of these images, my visits to the produce section in the grocery store have changed. Now I pay far more attention in observing and admiring the beautifully familiar and sometimes strange forms of vegetables and fruits. Weston has helped us to not just look at a pepper, but see it in its potential. Let's talk about the terms form and content. Form refers to the total effect of the combined visual qualities in a work, which include such components as materials, color, line, shape, and design. Content refers to the message or meaning of a work of art, which includes its emotional, intellectual, symbolic, thematic, and narrative connotations. Here we have two very different interpretations of the same subject, the kiss. On the right, we have the very graphic portrayal by the French sculptor Auguste Rodin. On the left is the more abstract portrayal by the Romanian sculptor Constantin Brancusi. One expresses the feeling of love, the other the idea of love. Rodin's work seems to illustrate and capture the feelings of romance, the passionate encounter in the sensual quality of the flesh. Whereas Brancusi's work captures a more solid, blocky quality, symbolizing the idea of two becoming one. They even share the same eye, the same vision. Rodin chose a representational naturalism to create his work, where Brancusi's work uses geometric abstraction to emphasize his symbolism. Despite the differences in their work, Brancusi actually began working as a studio assistant to Auguste Rodin, but left after only 1 month, explaining that, quote, "Nothing grows under the shadow of a big tree," end quote. Rodin is generally considered the father of modern sculpture, so Brancusi felt that in order to become an independent artist, he could not work in the shade of a great tree like Rodin. Iconography is the symbolic meanings of subjects and signs used to convey ideas important to particular cultures or religions. The origin of the word iconography comes from two Greek words, icon, which means image, and graph, which means writing. Together we get image writing. So the word iconography conveys the idea that an image can tell a story. But this is more complex because it requires an understanding of the specific, culturally constructed symbols and motifs in a work. The Night, Death, and the Devil. This large print engraving by Albrecht Dürer is full of what we call Christian iconography that would have been recognizable to 16th century European Christians. In its time, it was simply called the Rider. We can see here the knight is riding steadfastly through a dark Nordic gorge past death, who rides on a pale horse and holds out an hourglass as a reminder of life's brevity. Life is short and fleeting. He's also followed closely behind by a pig-snouted devil. The dog which follows beside the knight is Fidelity, or faithfulness, hence the name Fido, given to cartoon dogs of old. The lizard going the opposite direction symbolizes evil. The skull in the lower left corner is what is referred to as a memento mori symbol, which is a Latin term meaning, remember you're mortal. This Christian knight is meant to be the embodiment of moral virtue modeled on the tradition of heroic equestrian portraits. An equestrian portrait shows an important person on horseback. Dürer's Christian knight is undistracted and true to his mission. Dürer may have based his depictions of the Christian knight on the writings from Erasmus, who was a Dutch philosopher and Catholic theologian. His writing, The Instructions for the Christian Soldier, published in 1504, stated, quote, "In order that you may not be deterred from the path of virtue, because it seems rough and dreary, and because you must constantly fight three unfair enemies, the flesh, the devil, and the world. This third rule shall be proposed to you. All of those spooks and phantoms which come upon you as if you were in the very gorges of Hades must be deemed for naught. After the example of Virgil's Aeneas, look not behind thee." End quote. A more modern and politically explicit example of iconography is the Liberation of Aunt Jemima, created by Betty Saar in 1972. This work was made for an art show based on Black heroes. Before it was created, Saar stated that for many years she had collected many derogatory images, with some of them now used in this politically charged work. In the center, we see a blackface character that is not only a domestic worker, but a gun-toting revolutionary. She has in front of her a postcard of what Saar referred to as, quote, "Mammy with a mulatto child, which is another way Black women were exploited during the end of slavery," end quote. Saar also said, quote, "I used the derogatory image to empower the Black woman by making her a revolutionary like she was rebelling against her past enslavement," end quote. In the work, we also notice the Black Fist, which is a symbol of Black power that was first used symbolically in the late 1960s. In the back, you can see the repetition of what Saar called, quote, "a caricature of a Black slave like those later used to advertise pancakes," end quote. This work, this modern iconography, powerfully references the plight of slavery and Jim Crow. Who is this? And what symbols identify this character? You'll notice that this is a drawing of a human figure dressed in a tight-fitting top of red and yellow, blue briefs with white stars, and tall red boots. A golden design stretches across her chest, appearing like the letters WW, stacked atop one another in the form of a bird. The figure also wears headgear or a crown decorated with a red star and silver wristbands. She has long, blue-black hair cascading down her back, and she has a well-developed musculature. This happens to be the DC comic book character Wonder Woman, whose iconography is identified by motifs like her red, yellow, and blue clothes, her red boots, and long dark hair. What would happen if we removed her shared attributes or motifs? Imagine if we changed the colors of her outfit to green, purple, and orange, or gave her a short blonde haircut. Would we recognize her? Probably not without her traditional iconography. From the examples presented in this two-part series on the nature of art and creativity, it is evident that art is created through various mediums and for diverse purposes. Artists, regardless of their level of training, possess the ability to employ their creativity to generate something novel and valuable, capable of enhancing and enlightening our lives. This concludes our lecture on the nature of art and creativity, Part 2. Thank you.